Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is David Sandelman, CTO and founder of Canatrol. Thank you very much for joining me today, David.
David, thank you for having me.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. David, I always like to start with a little bit of background. So, how did you first get involved with cannabis? And, is it true that it all started in your garage?
It is. And, getting started with cannabis has to date back to high school many, many moons ago. How we got into cannabis drying in the garage, that started with a couple of years prior, working on a issue that cheesemakers are having, aging their cheese. Because historically, cheese was made in a particular region, a particular time of year, and they made a particular cheese. So you made cheddar in Cheddar, England. You'd make Romano in Emilia Romano, Italy, and no one in Cheddar ever thought of trying to make a Romano cheese where they are and vice versa. And today, people want to make any kind of cheese anywhere in the world, any time of the year. So they needed to replicate the conditions in the caves, and that was the beginning of this technology. And that then led to charcuterie, doing dried meats. And then we said, drying the cannabis flower is the same physics. Both of those products are about getting the product to shelf stability where it won't go rancid. And you want to control the drying and the free available water. And what the food, cosmetics industry, pharmaceutical industries, even museums use is a unit of measure of water activity. Water activity being bound and unbound water. Microbes feed on unbound water. Once you remove that unbound water, mold and microbes can't grow anymore. And so that's the objective of getting shelf stability. So we said, if the physics work for meat and cheese, will it work for drying a cannabis flower? So we took and built a proof of concept because no one was going to give us a multi-thousand square foot drying room to experiment with the idea. And we built a countertop unit, insulated box with a door, pretty much any kind of refrigerator or wine cooler for the box. And then we put all our technology into that box. Gave it to, we're here in Vermont, and at that time, rec wasn't legal, but it was just medical. And so people had what were called caregiver licenses, where they can grow for people with medical licenses. And we had someone who had a license like that and said, put some flour in it and try it. And they were like, old school, nah, it's not going to work. I don't have a place to hang the flour. I said, humorous, put the flour in there, see how it works. Let's see if it's going to destroy it or it's a start. And a couple of weeks later, came by, said, how's it going? He said, that is some of the finest flour I've ever produced. I said, can I have my prototype back? I said, no. And that's how we wound up in the cannabis space. We built a few more of those prototypes, gave it to craft underground gray market growers here in Vermont at the time. And the results were, this is unbelievable. And we now ship worldwide. I think we're in 14 different countries. We're approaching, I think, close to 10,000 installations globally. And here we are drying and curing cannabis flowers.
My goodness. I mean, that is incredible that it has grown so exponentially. Is the physics different from meat and cheese to cannabis, or is it all the same?
It's all the same, and it's physics. And so, we, like to call what some people will call bro science. That's based on not real science, but what they kept doing and getting a positive effect, but not understanding the underlying physics of what's going on. One of them we like is to talk about is the 60-60. Now,
what's the 60-60?
What happened? 60, what happened? So someone probably just had a harvest and it was raining outside. Oh, we got to dry this. We're going to bring it inside. I got air conditioning inside. We'll bring it in the room with the air conditioning. And they did. And it didn't dry. It wasn't drying. Why? Because the compressor wasn't running. The thermostat was satisfied. So they had to force the compressor to run. So they had to turn down the thermostat. Well, if you look at any cool thermostat, they typically bottom out at 60 degrees.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. So if they can take it down to 55, would it have been 55 or only 60? Cooling thermostats typically only go down to 60. So I think that's pretty much the origin, because the reality is the cooler the air, the harder it is to remove moisture. What a lot of people don't realize is when they buy a dehumidifier, let's say a 225, that's rated at 225 pints per day, and a pint weighs about 1 pound, so it can also remove 225 pounds of water in a day. They're typically rated at, I believe, a 78-degree Fahrenheit dry bulb temperature. And as you lower that temperature, that dehumidifier's capacity gets derated. So when
Hmm.
you get down to 60 degrees, that 225 might be 125 is what
Okay.
its rating is at. So lowering the temperature works against you when you're trying to remove extra water. You have to
Hmm.
work even harder to condense out that water. So interesting thing. So we're really diving into the science.
Well, in diving into the science, what was that initial proof of concept, early development like? What, did it start with a napkin sketch? How did you begin?
Well, early on for the cheese and meat, it was again removing free available water and
Yeah.
getting the product dry to a specific water activity.
Oh,
So
yeah. I
we
mean,
just,
no, I mean, like when you were building that first prototype that you put out
uh-huh.
there. Yeah.
Oh, well, we started out with, we realized that lowering the temperature is only going to make the work harder to get the water out of the flour. But on the other side, we knew if you heat the flour, you're going to start boiling off and damaging the terpenes. A lot of these things boil off, the volatiles, upper 70s, low 80s. So we picked a nice convenient number of 68 degrees Fahrenheit as our dry bulb starting point. Then using the calculations for getting to a 60.6 water activity, that got us to a 54, 53 degree dew point. Um, because it comes back to, people talk about relative humidity. And relative humidity is something that is not a controllable variable. Relative humidity is the result of two primary values: temperature and the amount of moisture in the air. If you raise or lower temperature, your relative humidity changes. If you raise or lower the absolute amount of water vapor in that air, your relative humidity changes. But there's no such thing as a dial where I can dial in my relative humidity because it's made of two variables. Um, I like to use the idea of a loan. All right, you get a bank loan, a car loan, and you say, I want to change my monthly payment. There's nothing that changes the month. You can't turn up and down your monthly payment. You can change the interest, you can change the principal, you can change the length of the loan, change any of those, and your monthly payment changes. But there's no knob that turns your monthly payment up and down. You got to change. Relative humidity is the same thing. Change your temperature, or change your dew point, your vapor pressure, and your relative humidity changes. So we broke that all down to the basic physics. We're going to maintain the proper temperature of 68 degrees, and then we're going to regulate the dew point. What ultimately happens is the flour comes to equilibrium at that dew point and then no longer continues to dry. It holds. So up until now, where people have been using legacy air conditioners, mini splits, dehumidifiers, all of them continually remove water from the flour. And at some point, you must arrest the drying process. You got to take the flour out of that space and then put it in a sealed container, turkey bag, mason jar, plastic tote, whatever, because you don't want it to lose any more moisture. Now, there's a lot of guesswork because people aren't using water activity meters to say when that right time is and seal it in a vessel. But what would happen is if they pulled it too soon and there was still free available water, and now they seal it in a container with that free available water, well, those mold and microbes are going to have a field day consuming that free available water. So, what was the solution? We're going to burp it. Well, we're going to open it up and let that free available water out, reduce the vapor pressure inside that sealed vessel. The problem is, well, if I open that mason jar in Florida in August, chances are the air is wetter outside than inside the jar. Or if I open that jar in Minnesota in January, the chances are the air might be right in the jar, and now we're going to overdry what's in the jar. So there's not a whole lot of science to this burping, but it was a necessity because the flour didn't come out of the dry room when you arrested drying process necessarily at the target. By controlling the vapor pressure in the space, the flour comes to equilibrium. You can leave it there. You can leave it there a day, a week, a month. Now you're truly curing the flour without continuing the drying process.
So when did you found Canatrol?
Canatrol is about 6 years now, where
Okay.
we've been in the cheese and meat for over 15 years.
Mhm.
But then we decided to focus on the cannabis industry, and primarily helping to educate people on what is drying and curing a flower about, the dry, cure, and store, and what's the physics behind it. And that's what we're working on. I think if you can see behind me, there's a little box, and we call it the trichome buster. Um, because so let's go back to when people said, hey, this is some of the finest flour I've ever produced. Now we're trying to figure out why. What's unique about it? And working with the Cannabis Research Coalition, um, they came out and said, you know, why people like the flower, one of the reasons is you've got 16% higher terpenes than typical dry cure using dehumidifiers and mini splits. It's like, okay, and those tests were done repeated and kept coming up with the same results. We're doing now real science. Now we said, okay, why do we have higher terpenes? And so we started looking at the kinetics, the mechanics of what's going on. And at the end of the day, why do we grow the plant? We grow the plant for the trichomes. The trichomes are the factory where THC and terpenes and all the stuff we want out of the plant are manufactured. They're in the head, that little clear, bulb sitting up on top there. That's the purpose of growing it. That's the outcome we're looking for, is those little trichome heads. And we started seeing that with conventional dry cure methods using air conditioners, dehumidifiers, those trichome heads, 20, 25, 30% of them were ruptured. With our technology, only 1 to 2% of them were ruptured. So now we're starting to get down to why do we have higher terpenes, and the why do people say the flower is so much better, is because we're not causing damage to the trichome heads. And that's now we're digging into the mechanics of actually what's going on. We believe typical systems, conventional legacy, is causing shifts in vapor pressure in the space, which is causing the trichome head, which is held together by what's called the cuticle. The cuticle is the outer layer, and it's only 2 cell walls thick. And that fluctuating pressures in the space are causing the heads to expand and contract. Where in our space, we're maintaining a constant vapor pressure, those heads are static. So we're now trying to understand, is the static allowing the cuticle to say harden, which preserves the trichome heads so they're less prone to being damaged, and that's why we're getting better shelf life? Or is it the fluctuation in pressure in a conventional system causing that two-layer cell wall of cuticle to fracture and rupture. That we haven't yet determined. Or is it a combination of both? We're working on that, but we're zooming in, we're zeroing in on where the magic is occurring.
Now, you keep mentioning real science. Do you feel like you need to repeat that just because the industry isn't necessarily flush with real science?
We hear some crazy things, like we're talking about the terpenes and everything being manufactured in the heads of the trichomes. And then people say, well, I hang my plants upside down so that everything flows into the flower so that it's not maple syrup. It's not sap. it's in those little heads. So we hear lots of crazy things like that, and we go, well, wait a second, this isn't science.
Yeah. What are some of the other crazy things that you've heard out in the industry like that?
Well, people talking about this the 60/60,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Where's the science behind that?
Yeah, yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Also, how do I know my flower is ready to pull from the dry room? I snap my twigs. Well, there's no correlation between twig snapping and the water activity of a flower. What I can tell you is when your twig snaps, your stems snap, you've overdried it.
Mm, hmm.
You're past the point of no return. So there's many of that.
Do you think your commitment to the real science in the industry has helped with customer buy-in?
Oh yeah. So what's happened is we have facilities that have adopted our technology. Either they've built a new facility and baked it right in, or they've retrofit their existing uh, dry cure rooms by removing their legacy equipment that they've been using, and immediately they see the results by the customers and their brand. We did one facility and they said, I've got 3 rooms. I'm willing to risk my small room. They retrofit their small room. A month later, we got a panic call from them. What's the problem? Well, our dispensaries that we're vertical and we also sell wholesale to others don't want any product other than the room that we retrofit. How quickly can we do the other rooms? We have another facility. He was in a state where there's been the race to the bottom of how cheap can we sell it. And they retrofit and then they were able to stabilize their prices. And now they're getting a premium price. And I know if you go into a dispensary that carries their brand, they're typically out of stock. Pretty much as soon as flour shows up on the shelves, it sells out because the consumer immediately sees the difference in dry cure. It's so important. I mean, think about the wine industry. You can grow amazing grapes and give it to 5 winemakers, and they're going to turn out 5 different wines. That all happens in post harvest. And in the industry, there's been amazing focus on growing incredible plants. But then the post harvest has really been an afterthought, a closet in the corner where that can make or break the outcome of those amazing plants that were grown.
No, that was one thing that I was reading on your site. The discussion over or around how cultivators are destroying perfect harvests during post-harvest processing. And I think you're right. I think that it is often an afterthought and often neglected.
Yeah. Yeah. Now they've been focused on growing plants, and now it's time to move on beyond growing the plant and post harvest and making that amazing plant. And now you have the tools to start differentiating between yourself and the competition, very much like what happened in the beer industry, craft beer.
Mm-hmm.
Are those
people. Oh, go ahead. Now people
No,
are.
I was saying, people sell a can of beer for what a case of beer from one of the big producers cost.
No, I apologize. You can tell I'm out of practice here. I keep swatting the mic here. It's been a good week or two since we've been at this. So when it comes to new facilities versus retrofits, given the current state of the industry, are you doing more retrofit projects right now, or is it kind of a 50-50 split of new projects as well?
A couple of years ago, it was probably a 50-50 split or even more new facilities as facilities were being built out. There was, a couple of years ago, there was quite a number of facilities being built in multiple states. Now the states are coming on. It's a little bit slower for new facilities coming online because of licensing and rec legalization and all of that. So now it's shifting more to the retrofit. And also, what we're seeing is with pre-rolls taking off, we're supplying a lot of facilities for their pre-roll uh, manufacturing. What they've learned is by drying, curing in our equipment, or even just storing places that do toll work, where they're bringing in flour from different grow facilities at different water activities, by storing it in one of our rooms for a period of a day or two, just holding it there. They're homogenizing it, and their rolling machines roll consistent. They're not constantly chasing, depending on the consistency of the flour, the texture of the flour, due to it coming in too dry or too wet. We're giving all the flour the same water activity, and the machines just run.
So is that something that you can help educate the automator, like the designers of the automation equipment as well? Just to, when their clients potentially run into similar issues with machines kind of getting gunked up or requiring additional maintenance, is there room there for them to help with that education?
They are, yes. We work closely with a couple of manufacturers of rolling machines,
Mm.
and they recommend, or some of them have learned, they even include our equipment with the machine because it saves them a whole lot of phone calls and aggravation where their customer is struggling using the machine because of the consistency of the flour going in.
So when it comes to bringing this technology in-house, what kind of ROI are people looking at? What kind of expense are people looking at? And what does it take to kind of get things up and running?
So ROIs we see across the board, the fastest ROIs we've seen, and how we basically calculate that. There's a couple of numbers that go into an ROI, but the one we work with is yields. We go to a facility and we see that they're over drying their flour. We'll measure the water activity of what they're currently shipping, and it might be down at a 0.5, where but they're concerned about shelf stability and mold growth and things like that. So they're over drying to compensate for not being able to dial in a 0.6 water activity. So we'll go in, do a water activity measurement, say what their annual volume is going through there, and saying you're losing 8% of your top line sales by over drying. And so we can see, depending on what their throughput is, anywhere from 3 months to a year, an ROI on the capital cost just on the savings of not over drying the flour. That doesn't factor in the premium they can now get for their flour and charge a higher price because they're going to be better than their competition, and they're going to have stickiness to the consumer that recognizes it being a quality product. It also doesn't include the reduction in labor. We've been to facilities and they're like, you know what? We were able to pull people out of our dry cure post-harvest process and reassign them in the facility because we're no longer constrained by, we got to take the flour out of the dry room at this day or it's going to be over dry, and all the labor of moving it into totes and turning it into totes and burping it into totes, all of that goes away. They can just leave it in their dry, which is now their storeroom, dry cure storeroom, until they're ready to sell it, or just move it into a room where they're keeping it in bulk and waiting.
Okay, so you say anywhere from 3 months to a year for ROI?
For on the capital cost against just the yield they pick up. That doesn't
Okay.
factor in the labor they might save. It
Right.
doesn't factor in what they might charge as a premium for the product.
So what does installation and training look like?
Uh, Training is basically we shall show up for a commissioning on a system. Everything is pre-programmed, and this is what you look for. This is what, it's a day. Installation varies, anywhere from places are doing it themselves, and we don't even hear from them. When we ship a retrofit, we send it with wiring and piping diagrams, and they do it in-house. All the way through, we might have to meet with the contractors there. So to put a number on the installation, that's difficult because, again, whether they're doing it in-house or they're bringing in some top, uh, MEP contractor that's going to, charge us fancy prices, but they do fancy work. So,
Have you ever had to turn a potential client away?
uh, I can't think of one. No.
Okay. I was just curious in terms of, sometimes there are limitations on buildings that cannabis operators can go into. And I didn't know if there were ever any that couldn't be retrofit, I guess, for the system.
If they're currently doing it in a room with some mini splits and dehumidifiers, we can make it work in that room. Definitely make it work. I can tell you there was, now I'm thinking back a couple of years, a facility in Oklahoma that wasn't thought through. And they showed us what their dry cure rooms were to be built out. And then we looked at their flower rooms and their production and said, you don't have enough space for what you're harvesting. So it's a bigger problem than us that someone didn't spend the time to do the math and think about post-harvest when they spent a lot of time. How many plants can we grow? How much flower can we produce? And put no time and thought into, okay, now what are we going to do with it when we harvest it?
Speaking of problems, does the industry have a problem with shelf stability?
We believe so, yeah, because it starts with people looking at percent moisture and not water activity.
Yeah. I mean,
And
okay, so not just does the cannabis industry have a problem with shelf stability, is there even an adequate understanding of what shelf stability is?
we're trying to educate every day by talking about water activity and
Yeah.
not percent moisture, because it's the water activity where the bound and unbound water that mold and microbes grow on. Your
Yeah.
percent moisture is the total amount of water in that flower, whether it's bound or unbound.
Okay. How can your process help with the entourage effect?
Uh, don't really know. We haven't gone down that, but we do know people say it makes better hash. It's better for extraction. Um, so, but back to the kinetics and what's going on at that trichome level.
Okay. One thing that I was curious about too is that you offer these quick start kits. How is a quick start kit different than sort of a retrofit or a new build?
Okay, so on a dollar per pound basis, our quick start systems are more expensive. The reason is we're supplying an entire room. So we build the room at our factory. We completely wire it. We put everything on. We test it. We run it. We then disassemble it, put it on pallets, and ship it to the customer, who then stands up the room and plugs everything in. They need two tools. They need a 5/16 spin tight, which we include, and an Allen key to lock the panels together. As smaller rooms, we've had customers build in less than a day and have them up and running. They just got to bring power and water over to it. So you're paying a premium for us to build that room and test it, but you're up and running in a day, two tops from the time you receive it. Versus a retrofit, we're selling the components with piping and wiring, and then you've got to, mount everything, pipe it, and wire it yourself in your existing room. So you're saving on the construction of a room because you already own it and have it. And you're putting in a little bit more in labor on your side. But all in all, typically a retrofit is a lower cost per pound than one of our quick starts. But our quick starts are great for a small operator. Doesn't have a whole lot of mechanical people or facilities people in house. It's a small operation, and they can stand the room up, by themselves with those spin tight and Allen key in the day.
Yeah. No, I mean, as a technologically, let's just say novice, we'll say novice, I certainly understand the allure of a quick start kit.
Yeah. And they're limited in size. Our largest one is takes up to 720 wet pounds of flour.
Okay.
So that'll put some perspective. Just once you get beyond that, you're already getting into a larger facility that's 1,000, 1,500 pounds per harvest versus 720, 700 pounds
What's the
wet
biggest
flour.
facility that What's the biggest facility that you've gone into?
Oh, 6, 7 rooms of 1,000 to 1,500 pounds each. So what happens is our room sizes, and we can do rooms of 5,000 pounds, but what you want to do is you want to batch process. You don't want to bring wet flour into a room that's already got partially dried flour. You would never throw soaking wet towels into your clothes dryer when the towels in there are halfway dry. It's not going to work. You want finish drying what you got in the dryer. Same thing. You want to load a room, dry it, and then move it out before you bring in fresh flour. So how our rooms typically wind up getting sized is a function of the in-house labor a facility has. How much labor they have to take down how many pounds of flour and get it hung in a day. And we find the sweet spot somewhere runs 1,000 to 1,500 pounds. Now, granted, we've spoken to people, they take down 3,000 plus pounds in a day, but they're rare. They just, their teams and how they handle things, that's not typical, but it's doable for us. So there is no limit as far as how big a room. Uh, that's just physics, and we just scale up the equipment.
Over the last 1 or 2 years, or maybe since its inception, the company's inception, have your customers had trouble accessing capital to bring the systems in house?
That's one of our bigger barriers is they don't have the cash. So here you present someone 6 month ROI. How could you not spend that? But they don't have the capital. And we've worked with a couple of finance companies, and they come and go. Or once people see what the finance companies that are willing to finance want as far as security, deposits, credit, who knows, or interest rates, people are like, I can't do that.
Okay. Okay.
So
Um, when it comes to the many projects that you've been a part of, do any come to your mind when you think of what have been the most successful commercial projects?
uh many of them are. Um, it's when you hear the stories like we retrofit one room, how quickly can we do the others because our customers, are demanding only that product. Others are just humming along and you just don't hear from them. There was one facility we did in Pennsylvania, medical facility, and we were, the system was up and running a couple of years. One of the facilities guys called. He had a question about, a spare part he should have, something like that. And we're chatting, and he goes, in our entire process, this is the only thing we don't question. So when we have flour coming out the end and there's variations in it, so we know our dry cure is consistent all the time. He said, we're going to start looking, upstream, downstream, what might have changed. But what we do know is that dry cure always is the same.
So when you say something like that, this is the only part of the process we don't question. Do you think then that there are other parts of the process that you might be able to tackle with some real science?
And we're starting to look at that.
Okay.
What we're starting to explore, and we're doing some tests right now, is maintaining because we're all about vapor pressure control in the dry space,
Hmm.
applying that to a grow room.
Okay. Interesting. So now, when you say you're investigating that, is that something that you're working with the CRC with, or is that something you're doing R&D on your own?
We currently have it in a facility that
Okay.
they're running,
Okay.
and so right now, what we're getting from them, let's call it subjective,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then we're looking potentially to partner with CRC so they can do true side by side testing.
Very interesting. Okay. Um, you know, when you were working in meat and cheese and you saw the opportunity in cannabis, did you ever imagine you'd be here now?
No, no. 6, 7 years ago, if you told me I was there, I'd say you are absolutely crazy. What I can tell you is going to the various facilities, meat, cheese, cannabis, sample takeaways are great.
I believe that. I believe that. Um, how much of how much of the business has the cannabis part evolved into? Is it a significant portion of your business?
Yes, cannabis is significant. Meat and cheese were a hobby for craft cheese makers, craft meat makers. There are just so many. It's a limited size market, where cannabis is really global and growing.
Oh man, I mean, you're just involved with like the best of the best when it comes to those sample takeaways.
Uh-huh.
Man,
We have fun going to an Italy to the cheese department and pointing out all the cheese that has our technology for drying and curing.
oh my goodness. So, I mean, I know that you can't really identify like one or two, but like, do you have, your favorites when it comes to cannabis operators? Just from your own personal, what you prefer when it comes to cannabis products?
Uh, there, I'm a flower consumer, so I like good flower and well grown, but again, post harvest is key. We test flower, my review of a flower is if I squeeze it and it's supple and sticky. And if you put it down on the table, you put your palm and it stays on your hand, that's a nicely cured flower, dried and cured. If you squeeze it and it turns to dust, I'm not even going to try it. I know it's going to be harsh. You're going to cough. Uh, what event were we at? We were at some event and we always travel with flour that's dried and cured with our technology. And people were like, I don't cough. I don't hack. It's like smoking marshmallows. It's smooth. You can taste it because the terpenes, it's not over dried and the terpenes are all there to be experienced.
Well, I mean, on the education side, that has to be difficult too, just because in some of those markets where you see people racing to the bottom and it's on price and percentage, will it take re-education of the cannabis consumer, or do you hope that they'll kind of find it on their own?
They're fine. So the facilities that are adopting this, the consumers are finding it on their own. Once they try it, they go, wow, that's so much better than anything else I've tried. They go back and ask for that brand again and then want to stick with that brand. You have it in the beer industry. Again, you have Budweiser, and there will always be Budweiser, which is your price point, high volume. And then the list goes on for the craft beers.
Yeah. So, what is your greatest challenge from a business standpoint? Is it access to capital right now? Is that your greatest challenge?
Not for us, for our customer.
Or, I mean, yeah, for in terms of growing your business.
Right. Is for more of our customers to have access to capital. Probably one of the biggest events that will be helpful for us would be rescheduling and the elimination of 280E. Because then our equipment is a capital expense. It's something they can invest in, depreciate. It's a normal business expense. It makes sense. Now, with 280E, there isn't much left to spend on capital equipment, and there's no real tax incentive to do it.
When do you foresee rescheduling and the removal of 280E actually happening?
I'm not even going to venture a guess because if I listen to the crystal ball people, it should have happened, I don't know, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And now,
I mean, that's my favorite part of, talking to people in the industry is just how varied expectations are and predictions as to what's going to happen in the industry.
yep, we have none. We just keep moving forward and
Okay.
are ready for the day that it happens because we'll see, we'll have to scale up quickly.
Well, do you have your eyes set on not just other parts of the cannabis industry, but are there any other niche or craft type industries that might be a good fit for your type of technology?
At this time, we're really focusing on cannabis and we're focusing globally. What's going on in Germany and other countries in Europe and just worldwide. We've got installations in Thailand, the UK, all over the world. We've got facilities. So we're, keeping an eye on the global market as well.
With your eye on the global market, which markets are doing it best right now, or doing it right?
Everyone's learning, particularly in other countries. Uh, they can't legalize it recreational, but they're allowing it under medical. And so they put a lot of medical manufacturing restrictions on it without much thought into the quality of the product for the end user versus the conditions at which it's handled, in clean rooms and that type of conditions. Does it help to create a better product? Not necessarily, but it comes from the world of pharmaceuticals.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, talking about coming from the world of pharmaceuticals, but what are your thoughts on the current state of the industry when it comes to, like good manufacturing practices?
Oh, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And what we provide is repeatable, consistent, measurable results, which all falls in line with GMP.
Yeah. Well, man, I really do appreciate you taking the time. And one thing, it was great to get a chance to talk at MJ BizCon this year. What were your thoughts on the show this year?
I thought it was great. I thought
Yeah.
we had a really good turnout. It was really busy, and look forward to a busy year.
Yeah. No, that's I feel like that is the point where people are, everyone has their own individual opinions, and that's kind of the flashpoint where the entire industry gets together and, everyone kind of, at least this year, seems like a lot of people came out of that show reinvigorated.
Yeah, there was a higher level energy than, let's say, 2 years ago. It sort of wanes, and then I think people are re-energizing each other.
Well, thank you again for taking the time today. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else that we might have left out, or anything in particular you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself or your work at Canatrol?
One thing we like to tell people about is the science is the same in our home unit as our commercial systems. So we encourage people to try it. If they're thinking about it on a commercial facility, buy one of the home units. Run a side by side with your current flower. It only takes, maximum capacity is 2 pounds, but you can do a side by side. And then down the road, if you buy a commercial system, we give you full credit, and that's a gift. So it really gives people the opportunity to try before they buy.
So what is the home unit? Is it, what's the form factor?
It's like a small tabletop refrigerator is the
Mhm.
size, because we need an insulated sealed box. So we're using, a refrigerator platform, even though it doesn't have a compressor or anything like that. So it's a little tabletop unit. They sell for $1,600. It takes 2 pounds of wet flour, and in 8 days you're smoking amazing flour. But you can leave your flour in there as long as you want. So we've had flour in a unit for over 2 years, and it still smokes great.
Really? So do you have a lot of those in the market with home growers?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
thousands and thousands globally.
Really?
Yeah.
What came first? Did the home grow machine come first?
The home grow was the proof of concept prototype to see if the science would work.
Oh, okay.
And that proved it out. And it's like, okay, now we can go big scale like we do for cheese and meat, because those are rooms that hold many thousands of pounds of product. So now we knew
Yeah.
it would scale up like we've already been doing in the other industries.
When you were doing that proof of concept, was it strictly for commercial purposes, or did you think that, hey, this little unit might have a play for home growers as well?
We didn't think it did,
Mhm.
and people in the industry laughed at us.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. What was that the aha moment when they're like, hey, we want that prototype back? And they're like, yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yep. Yep. And then when we started selling them, and then another and another, and then it was like, there is a market for this. The home grow market is a decent market.
Where do you manufacture?
We're here in Vermont.
Okay, and all the manufacturing, everything's in Vermont.
We're doing all the production here. Yep.
Wow. Well, I mean, like you said, you started in your garage however long ago, and now how many employees do you have? 20 plus, yeah. It's a different world. At least you can have conversations with actual human people, though, and just talking to yourself in the garage, right?
That's right. And our customers like it because we actually answer the phone.
I mean, I feel like the industry, not just this industry, all industries have gone two ways, where it's either customer service is an afterthought or it's white glove. You know, there's nothing in the middle.
Right. We pick up the phone, we help you out. You got a problem growing, so we wind up on lengthy phone calls where people start, well, my leaf is a little yellow, and because pretty much everyone on the phone here who's doing customer service, customer support grows.
Okay.
So they've got some experience there.
No, that's important to have that type of industry expertise.
Yep.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. And, sorry that I missed the home grow machine, but anything else? I know that you had the S series storage that you have as well, but you talked a little bit about that with pre-roll automation. Yep. Any other products or anything in particular that we might have left out?
Nope. The S series, that's an interesting one that, leads to, the pre-roll. We had someone who does pre-roll as a service, and he's like, we got an issue here where a customer supplied us with 1,000 grams of flour, and we shipped them over 1,000 1-gram pre-rolls. Because the customer supplied them with very dry flour. And after they stored it and brought the water activity to target where the machine was, they gained a couple of points there.
Oh my goodness. Well, so it's not just so stuff that's over dried you can bring back.
Yeah. Yes, you can bring it back to a point. Once the terpenes are gone and stuff, and they're gone, they're gone. But as far as the texture of the flour, yes, you can bring that back, and it improves in the smokability.
Man, that is cool. Well, that's very cool. And it's an exciting product. And again, thank you for taking the time to tell us a little bit about it, man. I'm excited to learn about what's coming next from Canatrol.
Yep, we'll keep you informed. It's great chatting with you, David.
Awesome. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. All right. For David Sandelman, the CTO and founder of Canatrol, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.